everyone. Welcome back to the second in our series, Do the Wrong Right Thing. Tonight's episode centers on seeing and looking. And yes, there is a difference, but in order to prepare this talk, I had to answer one question. Is looking deeper than seeing, or vice versa? So to me, they are quite different and should not be used interchangeably, but researching how they are used, I found it very confusing. I saw definitions like seeing is not believing, it is only seeing. I saw a quote from Philip Roth who said, seeing is believing, and believing is knowing, and knowing beats unknowing. On the other hand, Albert Einstein wrote, look into the nature of things and you will understand everything better. And certainly Thich Nhat Hanh, who I quote quite often, said, looking deeply means observing something or someone with so much concentration that the distinction between observer and observed disappears. And one of my favorite comedians, Stephen Wright, wrote, well, if God dropped acid, would he see people? I love that. So I'm sure there's no one way to know what's deeper, since there's no clear definition, but I'm going to put a stake in the ground and say the difference between looking and seeing is you can look without seeing, but not the inverse. Looking is easier. Looking is safer. It allows us the opportunity to look past or look through, and it requires your eyes. Seeing, on the other hand, means going beneath the surface view. It requires courage and hope and risk and your heart showing up, and the eyes are almost a distraction. Paul Gaugin's quote sums it up perfectly, I think. I shut my eyes in order to see. But that's not to say that our vision isn't absolutely critical to our survival and our understanding of the world. Research indicates that it accounts for between 50 and 80% of all the information our brains process every day. In the 4th century BC, Aristotle did a ranking of which senses were the most important for us to experience and survive in the world. And really not much has changed since then. His top sense was sight, followed by hearing, smell, taste, and then touch. Sight and hearing, he posited, allow us to sense things from a distance and therefore are critical for survival, whereas taste and touch require contact. Smell felt somewhere in the middle. And that ranking stands today, although we know the senses really need to work together behind the scenes to create the world we see, so the case is not quite so cut and dry. And our eyes are absolutely necessary for these critical faculties: visual motor integration, visual auditory integration, visual memory, visual closure, and spatial relationships, just to name a few. So it's no surprise we put so much emphasis on what we see. And our eyes, without doubt, are the most wondrous and amazing instruments, allowing us to perceive this rich panorama of the world around us, and yet our vision boils down simply to photons bouncing off objects and onto our eyeballs. And so long as an object of whatever size, distance, or brevity transfers a photon to the retinal cell, we can spy it, which means there's actually no intrinsic limit to the smallest or farthest thing that we can see. The night sky, with its dark background pricked by stars, offers some startling examples of long-distance vision. Stars are huge, and many we see in the night sky are millions of miles in diameter. Even the nearest stars, however, are very, very far away, but lo and behold, we can still see stars as intense, gleaming points of light because their photons cross the cosmic expanse and hit our retinas. But our eyes often betray us, fooling us, tricking us into thinking things exist when they really don't. For instance, we used to think the earth was flat because that's the way it looked. Or today, the way things seem on social media, where everyone looks so happy. And then there are things that seem not to exist because we can't see them, but they really do, like the virus or gravity or maybe aliens. Who knows? It's possible. So we have to discern what's real and what's not, taking into account the seen and unseen, because it may be that we can't see. What we can't see is way more important than what we can. Way more important, way more meaningful, way more truthful than anything in our field of vision. And that's where awareness comes in. Awareness can bring a magnifying lens to our experience, and that is truly seeing. It might be uncomfortable at first. Things might not seem as pretty once we observe by really seeing them, or maybe the opposite might also be true. One thing to consider is when we see through the lens of awareness, we see things not as solid forms, but as processes. As I often quote Carlo Rovelli, the quantum physicist, he says, even though a tree is a tree, a table, a body, all of these things, including us, are just events, passing through to another event, always morphing, always changing, not sticking, just at different speeds and for different durations. And so slowly we don't seem to notice whether it's our bodies aging or mountains forming. We have to look back to recognize change. But when we see through the lens of awareness, we dissolve our dependence on the concept of things as solid forms, and instead view things as natural processes. We can begin to relax, to let go and let things flow naturally, fluidly, and adapt to the ever-present changes, just like water. Take our thoughts. When we view them as things with an unexamined view, they become our belief system, and they need to be constantly verified, substantiated, and clung to, so we can feel secure and comfortable. But thoughts, as Joseph Goldstein says, have so much power when we're not aware of our thinking, and very little power when we are. Or take our bodies. They too are just processes. Gravity is tethering us to the earth so we don't fly off, but also pulling us down, making our skin sag, and entropy, moving from order to disorder, is slowing us down just like stars. So our cell regeneration is slowing, and it's just part of the process. Things are constantly breaking down when we see what's really going on. So every day we look with the lens of awareness. We are also aware that we are seeing, and also aware of the seeing itself. And the same with experience. With awareness, we are aware, we feel a certain way, but also why and what effect that has on us and others. And then choose the meaning we extract from that experience and how we want to proceed with that knowledge. We overcome our default setting. We are not mere slaves to our sight, our thoughts, our bodies. We exert our awareness to begin to understand and expand our comfort zone and separate out the difference between sensations, especially unpleasant sensations, and our reactivity to them. With unexamined experiences, we feel secure and we crave that certainty in this uncertain world, but it is a superficial, fragile certainty. With the lens of awareness, we truly see in the nature of things. We notice nuances, and when we are not so certain, we're open to different flavors, different shades of experience, and then life becomes so much richer. You may remember the wonderful story I told from Thich Nhat Hanh when he held up a piece of paper and said, when we see clearly into the nature of things, we know this is not just a piece of paper, but also the sun, the rain, the earth, the air, the tree, the people who made it, etc., etc. And as I often do, I like to quote David Foster Wallace's speech, This is Water, where he talks about how to see things. And I know this is a bit long, but it was just too important to skip any part of it. So he says, let's say in an average adult day, You get up in the morning and go to your challenging job, and you work hard for 8 to 10 hours, and at the end of the day, you're tired, and all you want to do is go home and have a good supper and hit the sack early because, of course, you have to get up the next day and do it all again. But then you remember there's no food at home. So now, after work, you have to get in your car and drive to the supermarket. It's the end of the workday, and the traffic is very bad. So getting to the store takes way longer than it should. And when you finally get there, the supermarket is very crowded, and it's pretty much the last place you want to be. But you have to wander over the huge, overlit stores, confusing aisles to find the stuff you want. And eventually, you get all your dinner supplies, and then the checkout line is incredibly long. But you can't take your frustration out on the frantic lady working the register, who is overworked at a job whose daily tedium and meaninglessness surpasses the imagination of any of us here. Then you finally get to the front of the checkout line and pay for your food and drive all the way home through the slow, heavy, SUV-intensive rush hour traffic, etc., etc. Everyone here has done this, of course. But the point is that petty, frustrating crap like this is exactly where the work of choosing is going to come in. Because the traffic jams and crowded aisles and long checkout lines give me time to think. And if I don't make a conscious decision about how to think and what to pay attention to, I'm going to be pissed and miserable every time I have to shop. Because my natural default setting is that certainty that situations like this are really all about me, my hungriness, my fatigue, and my desire to just get home. Or I can spend my time in the end of the day traffic being disgusted about all the huge, stupid, lane-blocking SUVs and Hummers and V12 pickup trucks. But this is an example of how not to think. Because this thinking tends to be so easy and automatic, it doesn't have to be a choice. It's the automatic way that I experience boring, frustrating, crowded parts of adult life when I'm operating on the belief that I am the center of the world and that my immediate needs and feelings are what should determine the world's priorities. The thing is that, of course, there are totally different ways to think about these kinds of situations. In this traffic, it's not impossible that some of these people in SUVs have also been in horrible auto accidents in the past and now find driving so terrifying that their therapist has all but ordered them to get a huge, heavy SUV so they can feel safe enough to drive. Or that Hummer that just cut me off is maybe being driven by a father whose little child is hurt or sick in the seat next to him, and he's trying to get this kid to the hospital. And he's in a bigger, more legitimate hurry than I am, and it is actually I who am in his way. Or I can choose to force myself to consider the likelihood that everyone else in the supermarket's checkout line is just as bored and frustrated as I am. And that some of these people probably have harder, more tedious, and painful lives than I do. Of course, none of this is likely, but it's also not impossible. It just depends on what you want to consider. So I'm not one of those people who need to drive an SUV because my therapist told me to. But this speech touches on so many things I talk about in every class. Changing our default setting, thinking the opposite, being curious and creative, and of course, seeing into the true nature of things. And that kind of seeing doesn't require our eyes. And just like not speaking, but listening, as I said in the last class, brings a richer understanding of life, not looking, but seeing allows us to perceive what is hidden in plain sight all around us, the natural processes of our life, our part in the natural order of things, and our connection to something way bigger than us. So if you are truly seeing or looking deeply, or however you choose to define it, your process becomes less about I am and more about we are. Or maybe even it is. As Confucius said, there's nothing more real than what cannot be seen, and nothing more certain than what cannot be heard. Well, I think that sums it up perfectly. So let's sit for a while and do our meditation. Thank you so much.